Hello and welcome to the Argyle Generative AI Summit. My name is Vicki Limbrunska with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we'll turn things over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Adobe. Our sponsors are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during the event, you can visit their virtual booth from the main agenda page, and that does include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag Argyle Digital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. I'd like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty today to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Thank you again for joining us today. Now let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Deepti Kunapudi, AI advisor at University of San Francisco School of Management. We are so excited to have Deepti with us for a presentation titled Elephant in the Room, AI Bias and Ethics. Welcome, Deepti, and over to you.
Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak and to all of you for joining us. My name is Deepti Kunapudi, Head of Decision Science at MoneyGram International. With 20 years of experience in data science and AI, I had the opportunity to lead different projects in multiple organizations and multiple industries. Today, I will be talking about AI ethics and bias and why it is crucial to understand and implement and align your AI strategy for your organization. And in the next slide, I'll be talking about what is AI and why AI is important in the current age and era. So in the general terms, what is AI is nothing but it leverages computers, machines, and mimics a problem. For AI, it is important that data is critical, whether in whichever format it is. And it is important that it uses the different kinds of models to understand the historical patterns, understand the feedback, and adjust the outcomes. And based on that, we make the decisions. And when we make the decisions, it provides us the insights through which we kind of like add value and solve complex problems and drive business value. So this is all about like AI and why it matters. And in the next slide, we talk about the AI ethics. There are a couple of examples around like some of the examples from the Amazon, what are the recent failures they have, and why ethics is important. So in AI ethics, we talk about like 4 different components. And one is the fairness, where we eliminate and reduce the bias in the data so that we have the right outcomes. Trust and transparency is the next one, where we need to have a clear, consistent, and understandable way of working so that we can trust the system and the outputs what are generated. Given that AI uses the data, if you pass the bad data, you will get bad predictions. And based on that, you're making bad decisions. So it's important that we need to have the trust and transparency within the data. And data is the one which is driving it. And AI is a kind of a tool which is helping us drive the business decisions and value. The third one is the accountability, where we are able to explain what is going on within the model and why it is predicting a certain way. So accountability is also like very critical step in the ethics, and making sure that our models are aligned to our data and the business and the problem statement, what you're looking for. And the fourth, but not the least, is the privacy. And there are a lot of concerns around privacy right now, given that without the permissions of the end users, the data has been used and the model is being trained on it. And privacy plays a kind of a critical role in the governing of the AI side. And it plays a crucial role from the AI policies and AI governance standpoint. In the next slide, we will be talking about the AI ethics considerations, which we will be having. It is primarily around the 4 pillars, which I mentioned before: fairness, transparency, accountability, and privacy. And if you drill a little deeper into the fairness aspect of it, is nothing but the first thing we will need to do is the bias mitigation. When I say bias is nothing but if the data is trained on one set of data, then the model will be predicting only on that set, because AI is just a tool which is using the data to allow the predictions. And if you pass only one set of data without any diversification, it is biased towards that one set of data on which it is trained, right? So that's the reason we need to have the bias mitigation and make sure that in your ethical process, when you are building the model, whether it is a simple regression model or a complex LLM model, the biases has to be considered. The second thing is the inclusivity of the data, which is just I mentioned about that there should be a diverse representation of the data sets to train the AI models. Otherwise, it is only considering to the point of like where it is imbalanced data set. And the third is nothing but the fairness audits, where we need to make sure that when the model is built and it is tested before it is went live into production, we have a check on all these criteria around fairness to make sure that the model is like working in the right direction. And it is like really critical in the age of era when we have like large language models which are predicting based on a certain area of like how the model is being trained, right? So I think the fairness, I wanted to make sure that when you are building the model, these three criteria are met, and you add more layers of auditing to it to make sure the fairness is established. The second pillar is nothing but the transparency. Around transparency, the major problem which we have is previously we have the simple models like regression, linear regression or logistic regression, where you can put explainability into the bucket. But with neural networks and large language models, transparency is a big issue, and explainability is another big issue to that. So when you're developing the AI models, we need to make sure that whatever the predictions are translated into a more explainable way in which the business can understand it. And we need to put an effort in there, because you can build a model with a basic data with maybe 30 rows or maybe 50 rows or maybe 1 million rows. But the idea is like, if you're not able to explain why the model is predicting in a certain way, then we are losing the transparency of the model, and we are making a decision out of it where there is no transparency there. And also make sure that there is documentation and like what features they are used, what are the techniques which we use, so that the transparency is clear to the business as well as for the developers and everybody else. And the last but not the least is the communication. So when you're building an AI model, typically we go with a governance structure where we discuss about like, hey, this is the set of data, these are the different variants of data which we have. And it has to be clearly communicated to the problem statement and the stakeholders who are going to use that data to make some business decisions out of it. So communication has to be clear, how the AI system is built, and make sure that it is transparent and we have a good explainability of why the model is behaving in a certain way. That means that we need to have a proper model monitoring tools in place to make sure that the transparency is achieved. The third pillar is around the accountability part of it, where accountability is not very specific to a particular data scientist, a particular AI leader. It is a kind of a comprehensive set of leaders and stakeholders who will be part of it, who are making decisions at each and every step of it. So we need to have a kind of an AI governance structure in place to make sure that we are going in the right direction. What data is used, what model is used, why are we using that model, how exactly the development was done, how exactly the deployment was done, and how exactly we are going to model monitor it. Because I've seen in industries and in my past experience that we build the model, the team builds the model, but there are no analytics on top of it. So we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So accountability is like a shared responsibility, and have a clear differentiation around the RACI, who is responsible, who is accountable, and who has to be informed, so that we have a kind of a similar structure like how we do for a regular project management, and have that accountability in place, so that when people are acting on that particular model or when they are deploying it, there are a set of rules and regulations around it. Right now, I feel like it is missing, and we are slowly getting there, but we are not there yet. And the third one is nothing but around the audits and reviews, making sure that whenever the model is run, developed and deployed, after deployment, we cannot say that, hey, everything is done. We need to have constant monitoring in place to make sure that we are doing regular audits on how the data is being treated, because the data changes every day. So there could be a data drift, there could be a feature drift. And all this has to be considered when we are deploying the model, or when the model is deployed, or when the model is being developed. So audits and reviews are critical, having a steering committee or something on those lines, and making sure that everybody is aligned on what the data is showing and how exactly we will be putting the guardrails around it. The fourth pillar is around the privacy. Since the consumers who are using a particular application or a product from an organization standpoint, we are passing our personal information to them. And how they're using the data is like very critical, irrespective of like which industry we are in. So from the privacy standpoint, we need to make sure that we are not passing on the private information of the consumer, making sure that the race, gender, some of the aspects of it is not passed, and it is like constantly evaluated on what features the model is using to make a particular decision. And the third one is around the anonymization. So making sure that when your model is passed, if you have a specific set of data, don't pass something which is very private information of the consumer, so that it is anonymized and it is like predicting based on a regular data pattern, but not on a particular individual race, gender, location, or any other PII information which is being used. And also always have a consent and control from the consumer or the end product to make sure that we are being transparent, and we are also providing the fairness to the consumer to make sure that we are going in the right direction and we are having the right control of our data. And in the next slide, we will be talking about what are the different causes and why we will have an ethics issue and bias issue in a particular scenario. So I categorize them into like three different buckets. One is the data issues, which I talked about, is the imbalanced data sets, right? For example, if you have a particular data where you are predicting a fraud, and you see that the data is like diverse towards one side of the population X, and Y population is only 10%, then in that case, we need to make sure that when you're training the model, we are having a balanced data set and also making sure that there is a diversity in the data set. Otherwise, you will have data issues because of which the model would be kind of like biased. And it is like, again, we need to make sure that we are doing kind of responsibly and accountably. So we need to make sure that the data is a balanced data set. And also the historical bias. When I say historical bias, it is primarily around like you are training on a particular data set, right? The first thing is, of course, it's a balanced or imbalanced. The second thing is like historical patterns change over time, and the new trends pop in, the new seasonalities pop in, and your data is pretty much trained on the historical data, but it also has to make sure that we are incorporating the new trends and seasonalities, and make sure that the model is not very much biased towards one particular pattern which it learned before, and also it has to adjust itself to the new patterns which is being shown right now. So these are the two critical points when it comes to the data issues. And of course, the sampling bias is all about like how do you balance your data set and what kind of samples are you using. And if you see a diverse set of data within your sample, make sure that you're having a equal sample of all the scenarios so that your AI model is like more robust. The second why is around the algorithmic decision. It is like primarily around how your model architecture is, and what kind of training processes are you using when you are building this model, and what kind of feature selection are you using to build that model. So when it comes to ML models, right? So we have like an ML architecture where we use a model monitoring tool. Then we have the kind of like containerize the model and deploy the model. And also we look into from the standpoint of like what features fit into to do this prediction. So always we start with the problem statement, then we look into the data, and from data we look into which model we have to use, what kind of training you have to use, and how do you test that model. It is like 70-30 ratio, 60-40 ratio. And if there are like thousands of features, what features you are going to use. We normally go by different feature selection methods. But when you're selecting the feature, you need to also be sensitive towards what attributes like race or gender is used, or any PII information or confidential information is being shared to the algorithm, because the algorithm would be trained on that particular data, and it will directly show that in the result. So we need to make sure that this is one of the causes why the model could be biased towards one or the other. And the last but not the least is the deployment and the feedback loops. When we are using the AI system, right? So we have a user interaction. If you have a recommendation engine, then how you ask questions, the model is again retrained on that particular data. And if the user interaction is only from a certain age group, or maybe a certain gender or certain race, then the model is again retraining itself in a kind of like reinforcement learning method. In that case, eventually the model would be biased towards the user who is using it, the major section of it. So we need to make sure that after the model is deployed, like I mentioned in the earlier slide, after the model is deployed, we need to have those controls in place to make sure that how the interactions are happening, are the trends changing, and based on that, we need to make sure that it is retrained, make sure that we remove the bias, and have that kind of like a framework in place so that it is like aligned to more neutral aspect of the AI development. And the third one is the feedback loops, which I talked about. That is the feedback loop, which I was talking about, like having that interaction, having that model monitoring metrics, making sure that if there are any drifts in the data, it has been captured and monitored, and a certain governance and accountability should be placed so that one person is like one or set of persons are completely reviewing that particular model behavior over the course of time. And in the next slide, we will be you will be seeing that how do we mitigate, what are the different strategies through which we can mitigate the bias. And the first thing is nothing but the making sure that the training data is representative of all the segments of the data, what you're looking for and what problem you're trying to solve. The second thing is around the fairness techniques, around like when you're pre-building the model, in the process of building the model and the post-processing of the model, you need to verify that you have checks and balances in place, have a reinforcement learning, and also like making sure that whatever the data is used, behavior, current behavior, and the future behavior trends has to be captured, maintained in a kind of a historical fashion. So if somebody asks or somebody does the auditing from the governance standpoint, you have everything captured. And the third one is nothing but around the ethical AI frameworks, which is around like implementing the guideline standard, having steering groups, having audits on a regular basis, having an ethic board so that we are making sure that the AI model, which is like developed and deployed, is consistent with the standards set by the organization. So these are like nothing but the three ways at the high level, which I think that it is like critical. And I was using the similar kind of frameworks in implementing the AI governance framework for the organization. And in the next slide, you see about the framework where I mentioned about the 6 steps in which we have created a kind of like an ethical governance framework or a steering committee framework, where we are talking about once you have identified a particular use case, and you need to understand like what data is used, of course, because you have a problem statement you're trying to solve. First thing you will ask is, where is the data? And the next thing you will ask is, how much history of data you have? And then when you look into the data and you categorize the data into different buckets, you need to understand the risk associated with the data too. For example, like I mentioned earlier, around like if the data is like having only one set of data, or maybe majority of the data is kind of like imbalanced, you need to identify the risk associated with that particular model, how exactly it would be performing, understanding a framework and its impact as a step one. The second step would be an iterative process. Like I said, we have a pre-processing, post-processing, and in-between processing, where you will be evaluating how the data is used, review at each step, and making sure that you understand the drifts in the data, bias, historical patterns, statistical analysis, to ensure that you are making sure that it is transparent, and also like you're not introducing a new bias into your problem. The third one is like building that accountability structure, which I mentioned about, which we look into it. Like for each use case, there are different set of stakeholders, different business users who are going to use it, and we are trying to solve different business problems. So in this case, you need to make sure that there is some accountability for each particular use case, and also we have a governing body on top of it who oversees the complete governance for your organization. The fourth step would be around like review the impact in the process. So it's an iterative process. It's not like you are done in the first step and then say that, hey, we completed the analysis and we are done. And as we progress towards the model building exercise, it could be over a few weeks or months. We need to make sure that how exactly the impact is on the process, and making sure that we enable that feedback and reporting to the governance committee to say that, hey, we see this drift in the data and this is what the approach we are going to take it. And get the approval from the governance committee so that we are using the right structure and framework for that particular use case. When I say framework and for a particular use case, if it's a regression problem, then you are looking at turning the numbers and predicting the number. And if it is a categorical problem, whether a particular credit card holder would go default or not, or that's a simple example, but you need to also look from that standpoint. That use case has a different set of data and the predictions are slightly different. And when you're building a large language model for your organization within your guardrails of your organization, then what kind of data is and how exactly you are using it, and how exactly the model is built, and what kind of data it is throwing out, and whether it is hallucinating or not. So these kind of things which we need to look at and report it back to the governance committee to make sure that, hey, this is a hallucination which is happening, and we kind of addressed it in a certain way. And having it review on a regular basis would help to make sure that we are making sure that we are not introducing bias, and we are putting an ethical framework and ethical model in production. The fourth and the fifth steps is aligning the resources in the organization to enable this AI frameworks. And of course, we need to have that continuous improvement and monitoring, and which should be an iterative process continuously for a next couple of iterations until the model is kind of like discontinued. So this is a kind of framework which I typically work on, and so far it works great. The reason is like we have accountability structure at each and every point, and each use case is treated as a kind of a different project in itself, so that we understand the risk and we understand the data and its impact. And also we categorize it in such a way that is it for internal use, that is nothing but within the company, or is it like outside of the organization? And within the outside of the organization, again, we categorize into it's a customer driven, or is it like an operational use case, or is it like something related to a product driven, or where it is used only by the internal users. And based on that, the framework is like kind of like modified to make sure that we are aligning to those customers, aligning to our internal customers, and also making sure that we are introducing a right method and right AI model for making those decisions. In the next slide, it's primarily around like what I mentioned around all the 4 steps, which is around like develop the ethical guidelines, implement the bias detection tools. You need to have your own set of tools, because the use cases are slightly different, organizations are different, how the data is used in the organizations is different. And also make sure that we promote data diversity and inclusion within the data, and implement the continuous monitoring and tools, and also like making an improvement in our model. Our model cannot be deployed and we can say that, hey, it is running fine, but we need to have the model monitoring tools in place so that we are capturing all the drifts, all the liabilities and the risk associated with the data, and how the model is being used in generating the predictions. So I just wanted to conclude that today we explored the foundations of AI bias and ethics. There are like few frameworks works. We just have to modify, tweak a little bit, and implement it. And there are few ways in which we can mitigate it to make sure that we are going in the right direction with respect to the new AI era. And addressing AI bias is not just a technical challenge, but a moral imperative, because our data, our model is being used by the consumers. And we just need to make sure that we are not impacting the fairness, and we are making sure that we have trust in our tools and technologies so that we can use it fairly, easily, and ensuring that ethical AI is like critical, and it is about holding ourselves accountable and making transparency a cornerstone for AI development. And as I conclude, I encourage everybody to take proactive steps in your respective roles. Develop an active ethical guidelines, implement tools to detect and mitigate bias, engage continuous monitoring, and improve your model. And let's all commit to making ethical AI a reality, because right now it is like all over the place and people are not talking about it, but eventually we need to think about it in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepti. Thank you. I see some questions have come in from the audience, but thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. The first question that came in, Deepti, was how can decision makers balance the ethical considerations of AI deployment with the pressure to innovate and remain competitive?
So it's a good question. The reason is like when we were building the framework for the AI governance framework, we were looking into ways in which we wanted to innovate. At the same time, we don't want it to be held back, because we need to consider all of them. So in the development process, what we did is like when we started building the framework around it, we thought like, hey, we cannot do in the first of the framework and the last of the implementation, but we need to be iterative. So we have a separate AI governance in place where we look into it from a standpoint of like, hey, these are the models which are being built, what data is used, so that we meet on a bi-weekly basis continuously to see the model evaluation. And we are not stopping the data scientists from and the AI engineers from building it, but we are kind of like reviewing them at each and every step, asking the right questions to make sure that they are going in the right direction. I feel like AI ethics and the responsible AI is primarily lies in the, it's a responsibility rise for all of them, whether it is a data scientist when they're looking into the data, they are reporting it back. And then it's a part of the steering committee and the legal as well as the security standpoint to making sure we are using the right data and asking the right questions. And that's how we wanted to be innovative and at the same time competitive. Like put those framework in place, but don't enforce it, but don't in a point of time that you're not innovating also.
Excellent. Thank you so much. The next question I see is, could you elaborate on the most common ethical dilemmas faced when deploying AI-based services and how we can prepare to handle those challenges?
So when we are deploying the AI-based, since we have like different variety of AI models in place, regression, classification, then we have this large language models, OCR solution. So for each particular type of use case, we have a different kind of ways in which we can deploy the services. And also the challenges primarily we see is the underlying data which is used for training the model. When I say it, like in my personal experience, when we are building an OCR solution or the LLMs, what we primarily faced is like when we have a limited set of data and limited set of human resources. If we give everything to AI to do the scan and build the accuracy around it, we were not very confident. So we need to put a human in the loop to make sure that we are reviewing it. And enabling notifications is another way of like identifying the accuracies. And also the other critical aspect of it is like what data is coming at real time. We did not capture it initially, but once we see that the data drifts have been changed, so what we put in place is around like what are the feature drifts which happen, what are the data drifts which happened in that particular data set. Is the LLM model hallucinating? And if it is hallucinating, how do we reduce it? So it is a kind of like, we think that AI is like, hey, it is going to steal the jobs and everything, but I feel like it is more around like you need to put a human in the loop to make sure that you are comfortable with the challenges which AI is throwing at it, but also making sure that you're efficiently using it to solve your problem statements. And I see that most of the organizations, they are not using the right model monitoring tools. I would strongly recommend that building a model is the easy part. Monitoring it, making sure that we are going in the right direction and there are no drifts from the ethics standpoint or the data or the feature standpoint is very critical. And having those metrics historically will help us to make sure that we look back and we see that, hey, this is how we started off and this is where we are, so you can measure it more effectively.
Thank you so much, Deepti. What an incredible keynote. We really appreciate you being with us today. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. And as a reminder, please do check out the prizes and raffle rules section to see how you can earn points for the chance to win a prize. And our next session will begin at 11:35 a.m. Eastern Time, and that will be a panel discussion titled Using AI to Lower Costs, Concrete Examples, and Real Talk. Please click the join button that will appear on your screen to be directed to that session, and we look forward to seeing you there.